Hello everybody, welcome to the 15th episode of the World of Brickfilms podcast. Belated Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I'm William of IW Studios. Joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Sean Willis of City Penta.
Is it still going to be Christmas by the time we get this out?
Probably not.
Well, technically there are 12 days of Christmas after Christmas, so it's close enough.
Yeah, well, happy THAC anyway. Because that'd be sort of recent.
Mm-hmm. We hope.
And so joining us today is our special guest, Nathan Wells.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we have talked previously with St. Macias about I forgot what it's called now actually.
The Cleaners.
The Cleaners, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so just fantastic film.
Thank you.
Easily my favourite of the year.
Thank you.
So yeah, congratulations on that.
I'm very happy with it. Zach and I are extremely pleased. We're also extremely grateful for the response because it took us a stupid amount of time to complete. It is funny. I know the topic of this episode is THAC, and we kind of started Cleaners as a kind of a THAC contest. We called it something like BMAC. I think it stood for Brickfilm Made. I don't know what it stood for, but it was like we were going
Brick Mind Animation Challenge.
Oh, that's right. We were combining our companies together. But basically, the idea was we were going to make a film in 48 hours, essentially make it like a super polished THAC film, and 2.5 years later, we released The Cleaners. So pretty good schedule. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you liked it, and we're excited to revisit Ernie and Bert in the future.
That is exciting. Any idea of how far in the future?
Well, I'm not going to give too much away, but we are certainly in the pre-production stages right now. We really would like to release part 2 in 2019. Of course, we're cautious about promising anything like that, because the last time we promised something like that, we were 2.5 years late. But we don't want to lose the momentum of the enthusiasm. So many people responded on the YouTube video going, "Where's part 2? This feels like only like the intro of these characters. Where's the rest of the story?" And we definitely wanted to make sure that enthusiasm continues. So we've got an idea. We're starting to figure out how it fits, because we want to maintain the same sort of feeling of the Cleaners, expand the characters, and feel how we can make it the same but also more, because the first one was just set in a hotel room, and it was a pretty tiny, self-contained, with a kind of ambiguous ending. And with part 2, we want to kind of make it a little bigger, introduce a few more characters, but not make it like suddenly they're saving the world or something, because usually that's what happens with sequels, is like, oh, it gets crazy and bigger and better, and we still want to keep that kind of intimate feel that the original had.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best qualities of the Cleaners, actually, is that it is actually really a small story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it just kind of, it works because there's so much going on within that sort of short story, but it's not some big epic thing going on. It's just this one thing, and I think that's is one of the things that makes it great, I think.
Yeah, Zach and I worked really hard, especially since originally the idea was it supposed to be made in 48 hours. Is we had the idea, it's like, okay, let's make it a film on a single set. It turned out to be 2 sets technically because of the outside of the hotel, but still. And it's like, okay, what can we do in a single room? How can we make this work? And that, I think, really helped inform the style of the film and the conciseness of it. Okay, we got to get a feeling for both these characters. They need to be distinct personalities, but they also need to be different. We didn't want just to make Pulp Fiction and Lego type of thing. And we worked really hard to make sure that both characters were really distinct in a few words, but also not just, I just forgot their names, Jules and whatever from Pulp Fiction. And also we drew a lot of inspiration from the 2 hitmen from the film Fargo, whose names I also forget, but one of them is Steve Buscemi, played by Steve Buscemi. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't just make Bert and Ernie knockoffs of those characters. So we were like, okay, We need one to be kind of the Steve Buscemi type, but not entirely. So Ernie is kind of that equivalent, but we wanted to make sure he was also competent and smart, and we also wanted to make sure that Bert wasn't just a brute. We wanted Bert to come across as intelligent as well, and most of that kind of was in our minds as we wrote it. It's not as evident in the short film because it's only 4 minutes long, but going forward, we definitely have kept that in mind for part 2. It's like, okay, we want to make sure that Bert just doesn't go around shooting people willy-nilly or punching people, and we don't want Ernie to be just a neurotic mess. We wanted to make a good balance of people.
It's good to hear that you've put a lot of thought into what you want to do for part 2 already, because I knew that there's always talk of continuing it, but I didn't know that it was actually coming together in any way at this stage. And I agree, it's a good idea to strike while the iron is still relatively hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a careful balance. We know that we're making it, and we are not afraid to, like, if people ask us directly, whereas part 2, we're like, okay, we're working on it, but we also don't want to be like putting out teaser trailers or teaser trailers of teaser trailers or, posters before the film is done. We were very careful when making for part 1. I had made up the poster that I had released pretty early in the process, like after we realized it was going to take more than 48 hours, but within 6 months of us working on the film, I had mocked up the poster. But we agreed that we were not going to release anything until we essentially had the final cut already made, because we are pretty bad at continuously changing things and tweaking it and going, oh, maybe if we do this. Like the decision to include trademarked music from Pink Floyd and Steely Dan was one of the last decisions we made. And once we finally decided that, it was like, oh, okay, here we go. Film's done. Now let's release the poster, and then in a week, and then tease a trailer on YouTube, and then in a week release the film. So we're definitely careful about trying to avoid that crazy hype, and then disappointing people when we're like, okay, we're going to actually delay this for another 6 months.
Or another year.
Oh, or yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think as well as, like, one of the things that you got to be really cautious about with, like, teaser trailers and things is that, if something is like 5 minutes long, you make a minute long teaser, and then it's, that's 1/5 of the entire film,
Yeah, it's like back in the old time when early brick filmers were like, I'm making a movie. I need to make sure I give myself credit for every position that exists. And everyone's guilty of that. I've done that. I think everyone in their first few films is like, I'm the director, I'm the producer, and the camera person. And, okay, let's look up. I'm the makeup artist. I'm the casting director. I'm the grip. And then later on, you're like, okay, 5 seconds for credits. That's it.
Yeah.
I've taken to keeping them all on one screen if possible.
Yeah, I agree that generally if you're doing just one or two things, that makes the most sense. In the cleaners, we stretched out a bit, but not too bad. It was like music credits for one slide, sound design and editing for another, I think, and then all of the voice actors on one. I think that's generally the best way to do it.
I feel like if you're incorporating the music like you did in the film, then you can get away with stretching it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we felt good about doing that, is finding the right timing with the music. What happened was interesting with the music is we were really stuck on the sound design because we were trying to figure out if we wanted to create an original score or what, or get someone else to make it, or not have music and just have ambient noise. And then right as we were trying to debate that, both Zach and I got departnered from YouTube. Just because they had changed their qualifications, and I think it was, for me, I didn't qualify for either of them because my channel was mostly dead. And for Zach, he didn't qualify for the number of views per hour or day or whatever they needed. And once that was
time.
Yeah, exactly, watch time. And once that happened, it was kind of actually really freeing because we're like, okay, yeah, screw you, YouTube. We can do what we want now. We're not going to be making money off this. Let's go on and use this soundtrack that fits the film really well. It's not going to be any skin off our back. And it was actually one of the best things we think that happened to us because we were just like, we're free now. We don't have to worry about copyright. It's the Wild West again.
And it is actually it is quite a nice feeling, actually. I mean, like, for a lot of brick filmers who kind of started later on, like me, we've never really had the chance to grow to that height at all. So the chance of us like ever being monetized is really kind of very slim.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you might start seeing a generation of brick filmers who don't even consider the kind of monetization, you know.
Yeah, it was interesting, both for Zach and I, we got into YouTube when YouTube was early, and YouTube at that point was like, hey, you look like you have a few thousand people watching your stuff. Great, you're a partner. You know, like, we didn't apply. They were throwing out partnerships to everyone, and I know there's some heavy nostalgia goggles with this, but, you know, from 2006 to 2007 and a half was, like, really great for brick filmers on YouTube, maybe 2008. And then, you know, a lot of stuff happened. YouTube got huge.
Viacom sued YouTube.
Yeah, all that junk. There was the reply girls that killed a bunch of stuff, and then they changed the algorithm, blah, blah, blah. I'm not as attached to it as some people I didn't really care that much. At max, I think I earned like $500 from YouTube total. But it was definitely early on. I didn't care about using copyrighted music, like in Unsound, my THAC film. That used a ton of copyrighted music, and a lot of Alex and Derek films used copyrighted music. And then I tried to move away from that. For 30 years, I got Nicholas Jaeger to compose the score. And then I tried to seek out copyright-free, royalty-free music. And now it's kind of circling back around where it's like, oh, it doesn't matter if the music fits the mood. And we really, like, it was funny when we were looking around for music, just as tempo music to set the mood. Zach found the Steely Dan song whose name is slipping my mind at the moment.
Dirty Work?
Dirty Work, thank you. And we hadn't even, we didn't change the editing of the film. He just threw the song in, and he's like, hey, what if we just have the chorus come in when the door opens, when Bert and Ernie walk in? And it was like, I don't want to do your dirty work. Oh, yeah. And it happened, and it was like, we looked at each other, and it was like, this is amazing. This fits perfectly. We had to tweak like 1 or 2 frames, but it was like we had filmed the scenes to fit the song, which we hadn't. And the song was so thematically nice with it. It was just not a random song. It was like the lyrics actually fit. There's other parts where it's like, I don't want you to close the door, and the door shuts. And it's just like, this is perfect. We got it. Like, if this is great. And we were so attached to it. And we were like, this is so good. And then we got demonetized. And it was like, okay, well, that's it. It's sold. We're going to just go ahead and use it. And that's how it went from there.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, it's sort of my dream to one day make a brick film, which is, again, is sort of like in the 70s, and use 70s music. But a lot of the problems I'm finding is that a lot of stuff I do want to use, you get blocked like worldwide for using those songs. So
right.
There is that as well.
Yeah, I didn't think about. I mean, that's true. I wonder if the Cleaners is blocked in a few regions. I feel like it's one of those things where you just have to. I don't know. Like, I wish there was an alternative to YouTube where you could do Vimeo, but even more stringent about copyright there.
Daily Motion.
Yeah, I almost feel like it'd be like, just do it anyway, and then if there's a huge problem, like, just don't let YouTube dictate the style of your film anymore. And if there's problems, maybe there's ways you can distribute it elsewhere. It's kind of tricky, but apparently Newgrounds is coming back for some reason. So, yeah, I think Zach and I both realized, don't let the distribution platform limit your film, because, we're just making a little movie with little Lego figures, and a few thousand people are going to really enjoy it, and that's great, but it's such a tiny blip in the universe. Why care if YouTube is going to, demonetize you or block it or something?
Yeah, kind of reminds me, actually, sort of related to this, I have I don't want to say too much because it's sort of under wraps, and it's kind of, I'll sort of say more at a later date, but I have plans to do a big Brickfilm collaboration, which is based on a concept album, and each Brickfilm is going to animate a different track from the album. Nice. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to say too much, but basically I'm really excited, and I think it does sound as though it's gonna go ahead. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, collaborations are great. Going forward for me, got to be honest, I'm not that interested in making films, or at least brick films, by myself. It's a very lonely process, as I'm sure most brick filmers know. Being able to collaborate with someone, either in person or online, is like super energizing. There, you get to work with someone else who shares your interests, who shares your talents, and I haven't done a community project since the day brickfilms.com crashed, but from what I remember of it, it was very just empowering to be like, okay, we're working together to create this common thing. This is really awesome. And I really encourage filmmakers, animators, brick filmers, all to at least try to collaborate with someone online. In person's even better. I know that's tricky for a lot of people because of travel, and a lot of people are, still young, can't, don't have the driver's licenses, or it's a little scary and to meet up with people. But when I met up with Zach finally in person when making the Bricks in Motion documentary, it was like, oh, cool, this is awesome. We've known each other for 15 years online. We met in person. Everything's exactly the same, and it was great. And I think it's awesome that I'm seeing more and more collaborations and community projects, because they were such a pain to put together before. But now we have, it seems like, almost one a year, or one every 2 years. And it's super cool to see that people are doing that.
Yeah, it's actually kind of unbelievable how they've managed to come out recently so frequently.
We actually are sort of seeing a revival almost, really, of Brickfilm collaborations. And I think it's one of the sort of most positive kind of sized community that sort of appeared in the last couple of years, really. Because I think there was a time when they just weren't being made for a few years, I think.
Yeah, I think they come and go in popularity, and I think it depends on the attitude of people. Again, I haven't been paying too much attention to the community. It was the whole sabbatical hiatus I took in college, and then I kind of came back. But I know that there are parts where everyone just kind of liked doing their own thing. It felt like in, say, 2008, everyone kind of felt like doing their own thing. And then other friends would get together and hang out, and it'd be either in, I guess, the IRC chat room or whatever was popular at the time, and just work together. It was the same thing what happened when in the early brickfilms.com days, where everyone would hang out in the chat room. And, when I first got to know the people there, like Philip Smeagol or Zach, it'd be just like talking about random stuff, and they'd say, oh, I'm working on this film, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm working on this, and sharing ideas. And I think it just ebbs and flows of people working together, and then wanting to do their own thing, and then working together. And it definitely seems like it's on the uptick of like, hey, let's work together. Together we can make something greater than one of us or a few of us could make by ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it's also a result of maybe overcrowding, and that people have to group together to make something that's going to get noticed. But also that there's not much in the way of views anymore. I think we might have touched on this before, that there aren't as many people who can just sort of exist in their own bubble with their own audience, and that's it.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people are banding together more these days.
Yeah. It again, I'm not as attuned to the modern Lego brick film community, but it definitely feels like even so-called iconic films of the year barely make a blip view-wise, and so they're harder to catch attention of. But then if there's something like the 25 days of brick films, I think is what it's called, if 25 days of Christmas, it's like, oh, this is a big deal. I should pay attention to that. That's kind of the same reason Zach and I, we talked back and forth about how we want to release the cleaners and where we want to release it. And I was like, dude, your channel's still manages to pull in some views and is still moderately alive compared to mine, which I've taken various efforts to kill bit by bit every year.
I was going to say, you try your damn hardest to kill that channel.
Yeah, I mean, I regret certain things, but not other things. Like, for instance, Minecraft itself, when I switched over to doing Minecraft videos, that the channel was already dying because of several years of college. And even though the Minecraft videos may have split the audience even further, I actually, it introduced me to a whole new set of friends, because several people who saw those videos, who watched my brick films, who were not brick filmers, applied to be on my Minecraft server. And now, many years later, we still hang out. We play other video games. I actually help run a Star Wars RPG where I'm the dungeon master, and they're characters in the alternate Star Wars universe. They're all bounty hunters, and so even though it kind of messed up my channel, I wouldn't change it because I made a bunch of new friends by deciding to mix it up.
Yeah.
But it is kind of, I do regret certain things about the direction it took, but I think it would have gone that way even if I hadn't tried my hardest to kill it, because YouTube would have changed their algorithms anyway, and then it just got too crowded, and I was too busy with other stuff to maintain the momentum.
Yeah, it would have just been slightly slower.
But I think actually that point is kind of interesting, because I think it sort of goes to show really that the things that really keep your passions alive is really the friendships, the people that you kind of you meet, and these sort of things. Like, I think that could be true of like games, but I think it's also true of like brick filming. It's like all these different like communities, these things that like have like a fan base. That's the thing which really kind of keeps you motivated to continue. And I think like for me, the best part of brick filming is the community, definitely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I'm going to be honest here. This is like the shockingly brutal inside look at Nathan's head. The only reason I stick around in the Bricks in Motion chat room is because of the friends I've already formed there. You guys and Philip and Zach and Aquamorph and all these other people. I stay there because I'm interested and care about what they're doing, and I do hang around to see the new films, but they don't, and it's no fault of the new films or the new brick filmers. It doesn't really engage me much anymore, and that's just partially because I don't know. I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago when brick filming was my life. It's still great, and I love brick filming. I love seeing a great new brick film. I love seeing new animation, and I still enjoy talking about techniques and helping new people about, oh, if you want this set to look good, you should maybe try to build it like this. Or, oh, if you want this lighting, then try using this gel, and so on, and giving advice. But I'm not really as engaged with, if there's a new film that comes out, it has to be something crazy to really grab my attention. But I still hang around because of those friendships formed over those years. And some people kind of are like, oh, well, why are you still here if you don't make stuff? Or, you're always griping about things. It's like, well, because I still enjoy the company, even if I'm not active in keeping up to date with all the brick films. Like, I still don't understand what the whole deal about what's the character, the no crime? I mean, that's an old meme by today's standards, and I don't get it. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't get it. And so that's how I feel sometimes. It's like old man shouts at cloud type of thing. But I still like the community.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that one is from your hiatus days.
Yeah, and it's a weird blank. Like, I remember so many things so precisely from 2005 to 2008, And then there's just this void. And I can only name like 2 Brickfilms released in that void because they were so impactful. I think both of them were by Maxime Marron, or I can't pronounce his name, but the guy who did Henri and Edmond. And then I've caught a few more since I came back, but honestly, my memory is tuned to 2005 to 2008, and I don't think that's ever going to change.
Yeah. Realistically, I think with myself, I'm going to university now, so this is the first time I've really had a chance to do anything Brickfilm related for 3 months. And thinking about it realistically, once I've finished university, I'm hoping that I'll find some work within the industry, but I'm not going to be doing the kind of Brickfilm related stuff, and if I am, it'll be definitely a very short amount of time, of my day. So, but I think the thing that I can always guarantee that I'm always going to be sort of a part of is I have all these friendships, and I think those sort of friendships, they stay with you, I think no matter what, really.
Yeah, exactly. And when you, I know there's at one point on Discord, you decided to take a break because you had to study at school. You had some exams coming up, and you had you were working through some things with classes, and you left. And then when you came back and you gave us updates, oh, cool, what's been going on? I wanted to know, and that's what I cared about. Is don't really care about as much about what new Brickfilm's been put out. It's more about how are you doing? How is, this person doing? Oh, how's this person doing at work? How's this person doing at school? Because that personal human connection is more interesting and more meaningful to me. Because for Brickfilms, this is not a diss on current Brickfilms. They just don't engage me anymore. And that's because of me, not because of the films,
Yeah.
I know what that's like as well.
Yeah.
It's you see new things and they're obviously objectively on a higher level, but then you see something old, the way you remember it when you were first getting into it, and you just like it more just because it's like that.
Yep. Nostalgia is a heck of a thing. And I can still watch and enjoy The Gauntlet or anything by Left Field Studios. I'm like, oh man, this is great. This is good stuff. And
it's just as engaging as the first time you saw it.
Yeah. And it's this is childhood. And then I look at something really good. This is this Brickfilmer. I think his username is Bionicle8 or something. He's done several adventurer style Brickfilms where really impressive sets, really impressive animation. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, objectively, I know this is good. And objectively, this is great stuff, and this guy's really talented. But I can't even remember his username properly or the films he's made. And again, not his fault. I'm not calling him out. I think he makes great stuff. But it's something about, since it was not a formative year of my life, it doesn't click with me as much anymore. Which is, I feel kind of sad. I wish I could click with them more.
Yeah.
And I try. I don't know. I think it's just like that whole brain development thing. They say, I don't know if this is true, but they say the tastes you decide, the musical choices you make when you're from 14 to 20 or something is the most important tastes you'll make. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I do think it applies to certain things like nostalgia and enjoying stuff.
Yeah. Well, I sort of developed a bit of a nostalgia for some things, even though I've only been sort of Brickfilming for about 3 years. But when I think about the films that I started watching when I very first started out, some of them objectively are just not very good. But to me, they're kind of they're the things that I love watching because they remind me of why I started out and when I started out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
So I've always going to see them as I did, when I started out.
Yeah, I think one film for me like that, and I think it's Sector 7, which was the whole film that inspired me to create the Brickfilm archive, because I saw it when I was really young. It had a huge influence on me. It's like a Star Wars Brickfilm, and I hadn't seen in years, and I was like, it's been lost from the internet. And then Sean was like, oh, here it is, YouTube. And I'm like, oh, cool. I watched it again. I'm like, okay, all the nostalgia. I still enjoy watching it. This is pretty rough. This is like 5 frames per second. It's of its time, but it was still great to watch it again. So I get that. Like, there'll be films where their objective production values are low, but that doesn't change the importance or the good feelings that they gave you when you saw it.
Well, definitely, I think.
But I think it's important still to recognize that, it wouldn't be worth trying to get in an argument with somebody saying, oh, no, this is actually great, though. You just don't understand. You weren't there.
Yeah, but also you should not be like, well, this looks terrible. Why would you never like this? Like, someone who looks at like an old film like 12 Bucks, which I still think is one of the best Brick films of all time. And I try to say that objectively, which is almost impossible, but I still think as an influence and of its time, I think, 1999 or is it 2000? 98, yeah. Of its, it's super important. And even though it's like grainy film quality and the frames per second is low and the animation is pretty good, but there are still some really great spots about it. Like, the story is clever. The cinematography, the lighting for what he had is still like influential. And I think looking at a film with its and just seeing its flaws, I think, is a mistake. Like, try to look at a film and see the good things about it.
Yeah, well, when I said that, I was mainly talking about things that are like really rough,
Oh yeah, like Anne Frank and Bricks.
Well, yeah. That's entirely different.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of. I'm sure people know the kind of thing. The stuff you see at the first stuff you see, and it's like, like 2 FPS or something like that. But yeah, stuff like 12 Bucks it actually holds up in many ways, I still believe. And yeah, you have to, like you do with real films, you consider the time in which they are made.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, with some people, when they release like the 2 FPS films, they're putting whatever they've got out there. When I was learning how to brick film, I did put out eventually my old Lego Studios films, but those aren't my first brick films. Those are the films I made once I had figured out how to do basic animation, which are tests that I either intentionally deleted or just don't exist anymore. So it's like, I think some people are doing a disservice to themselves when they, not necessarily disservice, but, they're putting up their very first baby steps and then they look at other people and like, oh man, I'll never be as good as them. And it's like, well, no, the other people you're looking at have filtered what they decided to put online. And it was like, I'm not going to, put this first test of me trying to figure out how to move a figure. At least back then, it was a different time where you couldn't afford to upload a video unless you really wanted to. It was like, okay, I'm saving my internet bandwidth for my finished film.
Yeah.
I remember when THAC films had a file size limit, and good films got disqualified because they were over 2 megabytes in size. It was ridiculous back then.
Yeah. But like, as well, I have like loads and loads of films that I've never released. And I'm always the kind of like, I'll watch them and I kind of think, do I want to share this? But I'm sort of thinking that at some point I probably will on like a second channel or something. Because it is kind of funny to see like how you start out,
Definitely. That's why I released my old Lego Studios films eventually, because I was like, I looked at them like, oh, these are fun. They're not great. They have a lot of flaws. I was 14 when I made them, and they were with the Lego Studios camera, which is infamously terrible. But it was still fun to like revisit them and be like, okay, this is kind of where it started, or at least it was step 2 where everything started. And I think people like seeing that. I think they like seeing the early stuff. Like, oh, yes, this person was just like me when I started out.
Yeah. After you've established yourself, I think people really do like seeing it.
I totally agree. Like I remember someone saying, I can't remember. It was something along the lines of like, oh, so you had this issue too. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't just suddenly decide I am good at brick filming. Here is Beast. Ta-da,
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, for the longest time, I thought that Material Possessions was your first ever film, or ever anything of any kind. So I didn't understand how you just started out with that and it was already good.
Yeah, it's funny though. I rewatch Material Possessions once a year. I generally actually rewatch all my brick films once a year at some point. Usually when I just am feeling like, oh, let's be nostalgic, I'm gonna just marathon all my stuff, and there'll be things I go ugh, and then ugh, and like Material Possessions is getting rougher and rougher to watch for me. Other films hold up, I think, a lot better. Flashbacks, I think, is great. I think Driven is still great. Material Possessions, I'm like, oh boy, this is, yeah. But I can see where I already had moved on. Like, it's funny, if you watch Material Possessions, I hadn't quite figured out how to make a walk cycle. So they kind of limp along because I think I emphasized one leg over the other. And there's a point where, like, I think Derek is just walking along. I mean, it's either Alex or Derek. And I'm like, I just skip a step and they're just like, ka-thunk, 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 thunk.
Oh yeah, like the same leg every time.
Yeah, it's bad. But I mean, I think all brick filmers should rewatch all of their stuff occasionally, even the stuff they're not happy with, just to be like, yeah, I did this. Look, I made this thing. Like when Zach and I released the cleaners and it was done and people giving it, the comments, we went back and watched and like, yeah, we did good. Like it's not like a ego. I mean, it's kind of an ego thing, but there's nothing wrong with like looking at what you made and feeling good about it. Because I feel like a lot of artists in general really kind of enjoy kind of beating themselves up about their own work. Like, oh, this sucks. I'm terrible. I'm never going to be good. And I think you should allow yourself to be like, you know what? I'm happy. Like, this is good. I did some good stuff. I have some skill. Look at what I did.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you think that you're terrible all the time, then it'd be very easy to give up.
Yeah.
If you don't think you're ever going to make anything good.
Yeah, and I think it's just people need to adjust what they think. Like, I think a lot of people, I don't want to say kids these days, but I think a lot of people put too much value into the views and the responses, and getting good responses is definitely encouraging, but I think people need to make sure that their priorities are, if they're making something, you should be making it because you want to make it, Like, if you want to make a 1970s crime brick film, do it. If you want to make a Lego Batman and Robin parody film, go for it. Like, if that's what you enjoy, knock yourself out, but don't do it because, oh, if I make this film, I'm going to get a ton of views. That I feel like shouldn't be your primary or entire goal. Do it because you want to do it.
Yeah, but then, what if you just want the views?
If you want the views, then do what's popular and
don't do Lego animation. I think we might have said this before, maybe even with Zach.
Yeah, if you just want the views, then, what's popular? I mean, do Fortnite stuff, I guess. You know what I mean? There, I just dated this podcast. This will be irrelevant in 2 months, but, yeah.
But, like, I think what you were saying earlier kind of reminds me, like, every Christmas, I watch the first animation I ever made, ever uploaded to YouTube, and it's called A Bear's Christmas Carol. And basically, it's a 4 frames per second retelling of A Christmas Carol with teddy bears. Nice. And I still watch it because it is. I still find it funny, watching it. And then I look back at like the film I made last year for Christmas, and I kind of think, yeah, I mean, I have made so many improvements, and I think it's good to rewatch your old stuff and compare it to your more recent stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. That's another thing. It's like, oh, look at how much I've improved. I look from, Material Possessions to Beast to Driven to 30 Years to 5 years later to the cleaners, and I'm just like, look at this. This is over 10 years of progression and improvement, but I can still see the original seeds of where stuff started. Like my passion for making the sets for the films started all the way back with Material Possessions when I made the, green couch. Like, I like making good sets, and I can trace what I like through my films, just like how Zach really likes doing certain types of animation. He has a very particular style to his look, and you can trace that back through his films. Other filmmakers have the same thing. It's like, oh, yes, I know this person because of that type of trademark, that signature look, and it's just fun to see how that progresses.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, I think that you can see, like, Zach's animation style even in his 2005 films, like, starting in The Bad Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, The Bad Day when Andy falls down the stairs is, like, one of the first instances where I'm like, oh, look, you could have animated that one way or another way, but he chose to animate it with Andy kind of rolling down, like, and then the final flip over and thud and slight camera shake. Like, the thought put into that look in 2005 is, I think, a very clear indicator of, his other fight scenes or physics, like in The Profession, where the guy's thrown on the table. That type of visceral feeling. Zach can always make a punch or a kick or a jump feel very weighty, which I think is really important in Lego, and I think is sometimes lacking in other fight scenes that I see from other animators. There isn't that weight to it, because since Lego is so small and so plastic and tiny, they don't have weight to it. You need to fake that weight. And it's I agree, totally. You can see that as early as back as the Bad Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always what impresses me most in a good fight scene in a Brick film, is when you can feel some weight behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that has a lot to do with good sound design as well. And I think Zach Macias is really famous for, like, his great sound design.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. He when we were doing the cleaners, I'm like, Zach, you're just doing sound design. I'm not. I'll give feedback. I'm just not doing it. And I think we've Zach and I've discussed this, and I think we have also discussed this in the chat, where I think sound design is still the most ignored part when it comes to brick filming. Because, to be honest, to some people, it's just not fun. Zach loves it. Other people love it. But I think of everything else, we've had huge leaps in image quality, in animation. A lot of people are going now to, like, animating at 12 on 2s or 24 frames per second even. So many people use either DSLRs or really high quality webcams, and yet sound design is still a little janky, a little stuck in the past, I feel.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually. And I think the sound design is starting to definitely become one of my favourite parts of like the whole process, actually. Like with starting as university, I've been trying to think to myself, what are the like aspects of film that I could translate into like live action stuff, because there's a lot of stuff which just doesn't really like translate in the same way. You have to start from scratch.
Right.
But I think one of the things that you can translate into live action is your knowledge of sound, and I think it is definitely something that is like ignored, and I feel like I have at least some knowledge of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something that I might even go into as a profession, hopefully. Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree that of all the things, I think you could also translate like basic knowledge of camera blocking and character blocking and cinematography. But yeah, there's a lot of things in brick filming that is either exclusive to animation or even exclusive to brick filming itself. Sound design is like essentially unchanged. I think one of the biggest hurdles to it is with professional sound design, they usually record all of their own sounds to fit they use stock sounds, obviously, but there's often when they're doing Foley work, they have a Foley artist who is recording fresh new sounds for the films, where brick filmers don't have that resource available to them. It's not like you can go out and buy a 5-pound piece of meat and then hit it to get that really nice punching sound effect. So you're limited to finding pre-recorded stock sounds, and most of the time those stock sounds don't fit very well. So even if you put the effort into finding a really good sound effect, it still doesn't fit perfectly because it wasn't recorded for your particular shot.
Yeah, I think one of the things I have actually decided to do is record all the footsteps.
Nice.
Because I find footsteps really, really hard to get good like sounds of.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've tried like all these different like online sound sort of like sites, and it's almost impossible. Because sometimes they're so specific to like, oh, here's like with leaves, here's with, you know.
Yeah, and I have found as I've worked on my films and also just let Zach do stuff, is we have, as the years progressed, de-emphasized sound footsteps as much as possible, because in real life, let's be honest, you don't hear footsteps that often.
No.
And because most people are walking on carpet or soft flooring, and even if you're walking on hard flooring, unless you're like wearing heels or something, or steel-toed boots, footsteps are pretty muffled. And I think it's funny how a lot of brick filmers seem to have an obsession with like, this person is putting their foot down. All right, where's that foot down sound? You know, and of course, I'm totally guilty of that too.
Oh yeah, well I mean, back in the early years, everyone just had all their figures clapping around.
Yeah, Beast is pretty rough in that regard.
The one thing that I can't stand with Beast is just the constant.
Yeah. Hey, and guess what? Beast was nominated for best sound design for whatever that. I don't know. Was it Bampa back then or Bema? I don't know. One of those things. Yeah, that's actually honestly. There's two parts when I watch Beast that make me just go ugh, like ugh. One is the foot sounds and the sound design in that. And the other part is a really embarrassing line that just showed I didn't care to do basic research, where the lab tech is like made this really dumb joke about, oh, what's like, I don't know, something like, what's got opposable thumbs and has over 4,000 years of evolution to brag about? And Bill Gristle's like, the DNA's human. And I go back and I'm like, ooh, okay, yeah, that's a bad line. There's so many things wrong with that line. And if that would be one thing I would go back and completely rewrite or cut, because that's just so many things wrong with that line that makes me not like it. Anyway, got off topic again.
Well, we are 50 minutes in. I guess it's about time to actually start asking questions.
Oh yeah, geez.
So, when did you actually start brick filming, and what got you into it?
Okay, well, let's see. Very first thing that got me into brick filming, I gotta rewind. I think the very first time I was introduced to stop motion, because I think that's a good start, was either Aardman's Chicken Run or The Nightmare Before Christmas. And that was when I was first aware of what stop motion was. No, actually, I take that back. Wallace and Gromit was the first time I saw stop motion animation. Didn't quite know what it was, but I was like, oh, this is intriguing. Then I saw Chicken Run and a few others. This was back before stop motion really was huge. Like nowadays, we can look forward to a Leica film every few years. But I was intrigued by stop motion. I was really into Lego. I've always been a Lego fan before I was a brick filmer. I kind of went through phases with Lego. I was really into Castle initially, and in the early years of online, I actually was one of the main administrators for a website called ClassicCastle.com, which is all about Lego Castle. And they're still running. They look like they haven't changed since the early 2000s, which is kind of funny. But that was the big thing I was into. I, for a brief period, was into Lego Mindstorms. And when I was getting Mindstorm stuff, that was the old Lego robot stuff. That was back when they had the big yellow brick, the RCX, before they made everything shiny and white. And one of the secondary sets that you could get was a set called Vision Command. And Vision Command came with the Lego Cam, the same model of Lego Cam that came in the Lego Studios set, just with a different casing. So these came out at the same time, Lego Studios and Vision Command. And I was aware of Lego Studios, and I was watching Brickfilms on the Lego Studios website. One of the first Brickfilms I ever saw was Hunted by David Pagano, which is crazy because I didn't realize it was by David Pagano until like 5 years ago when I was looking through his early stuff. And I was like, holy crap, that was like one of the first Brickfilms I've ever seen. Then I saw, of course, all the Lego Studios Brickfilms, like the Dino Cop and all the stuff that they released online. The Monty Python in Lego. I think 2001 in Lego. Stuff like that. So I was working with the Vision Command camera to make little films using my Star Wars Lego. That's when Phantom Menace had been just released a few years ago. And so it was huge, and that was back before people realized it sucked. So I had, all the new Lego Star Wars sets. And I was just using sticky tack and putting them on the ends of like little sticks and just live actioning them. And I remember that one distinctly thing I remember is I created a little rotating throne for the Emperor Palpatine, out of a Lego motor. And I filmed it, and I had him turn around all dramatic like, and he was like saying something, like, I have you now. And so all my early stuff was live action. But I was interested in stop motion, and I had been doing research as best I could online, and I discovered Brickfilms.com, which at that point was 2003-ish. So I was lurking on the site. I saw, stuff like by Jay Silver, The Gauntlet, and so on. And I eventually I bought myself a Lego Studios used set online on eBay because I was trying to use the Vision Command camera, and I tried to buy some software to work with it, and that didn't work out. So I just decided to bite the bullet and go with Lego Studios. And that's where I made my Lego Studios films that you can see on my channel, like Super Brilliant Sheriff and all those good stuff.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Super Brilliant Sheriff.
That one is so bad it's good. Like, I don't cringe at it like I do at some things, because it's like, this is just classic early 2003, 2004 Nathan. And I also remember it fondly because I made a bunch of those films with my sister. So there's a lot of collaboration. In fact, that was probably my earliest collaboration. Is like, she wouldn't do much. Because she was younger. She's younger than me, and she had other interests, but she would come in and help with a few things. So I was figuring things out, and then I was hanging around Brickfilms.com, and that's kind of like I just started doing more and more. And as it was good timing. Oh, I remember it. I think I got the Logitech Webcam 4000 for Christmas, and then THAC rolled around. Right? No, it was not THAC. It was 10 Lines Contest. It was the 10 Lines Contest that prompted me to do Material Possession. So I really think I'd gotten the webcam, so I'd asked it for Christmas, and right after that, the 10 Lines Contest took place, and that's when I made Material Possessions.
And is that about the point where you first became active on the site? Because I know your account was registered in 2003.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I was definitely lurking. Of course, since the site's now completely obliterated, I can't go back and look at my post history. But I think I was lurking pretty quietly, and then the 10 Lines Contest happened, and that's when I kind of came out of the woodwork and started posting, started interacting, started going to the chat room. Yeah, I think that sounds about right. It's like once the contest came out, and like that was that motivator, that's when I started actually participating.
And which like Brickfilmers and like Brickfilms like really like inspired you when you started out?
Which Brickfilms? Early on. Well, I already mentioned Sector 7. That was an early Brickfilm that I saw that for some reason just grabbed my attention. I think it was because it actually had a moderately good story, and it was a relatively long Brickfilm. So that, back then it was like anything over 2 minutes was a big deal. And of course you had to download everything yourself. This was pre-YouTube. So you had to commit. And I remember in fact, part of the reason, that I was able to salvage a decent amount of Brickfilms for the archive is I just download the films and never bothered to delete them. And the reason I have some films of questionable quality is you didn't know what you were getting. So you would just go, oh, I hope this is good. Download it, go, that wasn't good. And then move on to the next one. And it would literally take 10 minutes to download a 2 megabyte, 3 megabyte film. So early on, The Gauntlet, of course, anything by Left Field Studios. Spite Your Face was big back then. So they were doing like A Space Odyssey, or Lego Odyssey. Another big one that no one really knows about anymore, and is 2001 A Lego Odyssey, which is by Mark Atkin. And it's an interesting film. It was basically a 3-part film going through the history of Lego, but also mirrors the plot structure of 2001 A Space Odyssey. And it's very low FPS. It's like 5 frames per second. But it's really nicely built, and it's actually really good image quality for its time. And it really connected with me, and I don't know why. I think it just did. Something about back then you didn't really have a reason for stuff to connect. It just like, if it did, it did. And it's one of those films I think definitely that only like I and a few other people remember. And it was definitely just like, wow, this is something I could make. This is something I could do. And in fact, fun fact, it was such a influence that I did an homage to it. The opening scene of 30 Years, The Story of the Minifigure, is a almost direct recreation of the opening scene from 2001 A Lego's Odyssey. The same character. I tweaked the look of him a bit, but if you look at them side by side, I did the best I could to recreate the set as an homage, because that one was definitely an early influence.
Yeah, I think we actually mentioned that previously. I think Trick-a-Brick mentioned how you were inspired by 2001 A Lego Odyssey to recreate that scene.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
I think you weren't on. It was the one episode you weren't there.
Oh, right.
But yeah, so you're actually planning to take part in THAC.
Yes, after 4 years of running THAC, I am finally free again and willing and able to actually enter. I'm excited. The last time I attempted to enter THAC, I made The Meek and the Bold, which I think is one of my more forgotten films. I'm still pretty happy with it, but it definitely seemed to like appear, do nothing, and then disappear. And I think part of that is because I didn't actually finish it in time for THAC. So I made it, didn't quite make it in time, and was like, you know what? I can do this better. And then I immediately took over THAC.
But what do you think you learned from making The Meek and the Bold and not getting it in time for the deadline? What do you think you'd change this time?
Well, I think I had reached the point. It was also, let's see, Meek and the Bold was after I came back. Yeah, after my hiatus. And I think the problem was, I feel like when I make something, there has to be a minimum amount of, for lack of a better word, quality in it. And I that sounds kind of egotistical, but it's more like, I feel like if I'm going to present something to people, there needs to be a minimum amount of how it looks. So, and that bar I keep raising for myself each time I make something. So I had made 5 years later, I believe. My timeline's a little messed up. And I was like, okay, I've made this stuff. If I'm making something for THAC, I know that I need to keep it simple. Like, so that's why I kept it to a single set. But it was like, I still need to make it a good set. I need to have good animation, and good sound design. And I keep raising the bar on what is a minimum acceptability for me, which I think was definitely my downfall. It's like, okay, this has to be perfect. And obviously for THAC, you've got to throw that by the wayside. So I think also, since I had not made a THAC film in a long time, I had forgotten what the importance, the point of THAC was it doesn't matter how good it is, it's the fact that you made it in 24 hours. And I was like, no, it has to be good as well. And there are lots of really good THAC films that have lasted, but they also were not afraid of saying, this is good enough, stop, cut corners.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that THAC really, at the end of the day, it's like a contest about who can cut corners the best.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you're trying to, you're not cheating, but you're like, okay, like, look, how can I make this little thing as good as possible on this ridiculous timeline, you know? And with The Meek and the Bold, I was like, no, this still has to be good. I have a standard to maintain, you know. People know me as you know, I'm Nathan Wells. I make the good sets. And I look at it now, and actually, apparently, Meek and the Bold was made before 5 years later. Maybe, I think I was making 5 years later, and then I took a break and did Meek and the Bold. I'm pretty certain that's what happened. And so I was like, I had this standard that I had raised for myself, and now I'm trying to pull back and be like, okay, that's, you know, I want to keep it simple. I've set 2 rules for myself. I really want to keep it to 1 set, maybe 2 if the second set is simple. And I want to keep the script to 2 pages or less. Because The Meek and the Bold was like a 4-page script. And that, it was just, the story could not be cut down any more than it already was. And that was another downfall, I think. I really want to keep it simple.
But I was going to say that Meek and the Bold, I remember the set, and that is very nice. And I'm guessing that was actually done within the 24 hours. Yep,
I have a personal rule that I don't do any prep. The only thing I do is I make sure my studio is clean and everything's set up for it, but no set building, no pre-planning, any plot ideas. I like to do everything within the 24 hours. Other people do otherwise, and that's fine, whatever. I just think it's more in the spirit of the contest to do everything in the 24 hours. So I pretty much just give myself a handicap.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've never actually done the full 24 hours. This time, I'm kind of tempted to, like, do an all-nighter, but I'm sort of thinking I might have, like, a couple hours sleep. But, yeah, I'm going to sort of try a bit harder to actually use up those, like the entire, 24 hours, you know?
Yeah, it's also another thing with The Meek and the Bold, and again, this is another whole, like, I'm getting old type of thing. The Meek and the Bold was definitely the first time I was like, oof, okay, doing this thing for a whole 24 hours is kind of rough.
Yeah.
The other times I entered, I was some young, dumb, stupid teen, and I could just do it, just power through it. For this one, I was like, oh, I am feeling this. And I think I'll have to gauge on how this year goes. I don't really do naps, but I might need to nap in the middle, or I've considered, instead of getting up at 4 a.m., I might get up at 6 and just get up 2 hours later. Because that's when it starts for me, is 4 in the morning. So I'm trying to gauge how that goes. Or I might get up, look at the theme, and go back and doze, but I might be too hyped. It's definitely, as I get older, I mean, I am 30 now. It's like, oh, wow, okay. I can't quite do that as much.
Yeah, I find it gets more painful every year.
Yeah. I would. One other thing I'd like to do is maybe not make a film that has minifigures in it. That's like if I have an idea that works. I enjoy like the weirdness. I go like what's it called? Greedy Bricks, which was a different type of film for a different contest. But you know, what can I tell with a story that maybe doesn't require me trying to animate a stupid walk cycle for a minifigure? So we'll see. It all depends on the story.
Yeah, walk cycles are the worst when it comes to THAC.
Yeah.
Like, I find that when I think I was doing Brawl, and I was thinking it was like the last night, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was thinking, oh, I've got like 5 more shots to do, and now I've got to do a shot where 3 people walk in this in the same shot, thinking, oh,
yeah.
No.
No, when I did Brawl, I definitely took it really simple. I was working, I had a job, and when I made Blinders, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a film, an animated film, that just barely scrapes by the minimum required amount of actual animation. Because if you watch Brawl, there is so little animation in there.
Blinders.
Sorry, yeah, Blinders. Yeah, thank you. There is so little animation, and I still barely got it done in time. I think I'm not dissing Brawl because I think a lot of people like it, and I think it is a good contest, but I think it's a good contest for a certain demographic of people, namely kids who are of a certain age who go to school who don't have stuff happening during the summer. Because then they can actually utilize... Like, I'd be all over Brawl if I was still 14 or 15, when I had all the free time. Brawl is not kind to people who have jobs, because they still have to work during the week. Where I think THAC is a great equalizer. Pretty much anyone can get the weekend off if they plan ahead. And yes, the younger animators may have more energy, but it's still... Everyone still has that 24 hours. So I'm glad Brawl exists. I'm glad it kind of helped feed that community enthusiasm for contests that was missing when the summer contest kind of died out for a little bit. But I always, I think, enjoy THAC more just to see what everyone makes on this pretty even playing field.
Yeah, and I think as well, like with Brawl, you go into it always thinking like, oh, you know, this is like THAC, but you know, you got 7 days. This is going to be so much easier, and then you actually do it, and you find that because I guess you sort of think to yourself, well, I don't have to do everything now. You end up like leaving so much to near the end, and it becomes THAC anyway.
Yeah, totally. I've seen that, and when I went in making Blinders, I'm like, I treated it like THAC because I essentially, except for the weekend, only had 3 hours a night to make it. So I basically had the equivalent of 24 hours to make Blinders, just spread throughout a week. And it was definitely... I enjoyed making it, but I don't think I'll ever enter Brawl again. I have really no reason to. I mean, I also won Brawl, so I can check that off my list.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm done. I'm good.
Yeah, if you did that, like, check the list every time you kind of, like, actually came first place, I think Twickerbrick would probably not actually enter many contests at all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Twickerbrick was doing great. And also, Forlorn Creature did a lot. Got a lot of, especially for THAC. The last few THACs have been doing really well. I'm coming for you. I'll challenge you. I don't know if he's entering this year.
I think he might not be, actually.
Oh, darn. Oh, well, we'll see.
I've heard that Sloth has kind of like sort of shown interest in taking part.
Cool. Well, fingers crossed. I hope. I always love it seeing all the different people, whoever enters. It's fun to see the variety. It's fun also. Yeah. I mean, it's funny to see both how crazy wild you can interpret the theme, and also how there'll also be at least one entry that just uses the theme as the title. And there'll always be one that is just like, oh, the theme was hide and seek. Well, the person hid and then they were found. You know, it's like there's always some classic things you're going to see no matter what. There's also going to be one meta one about THAC, at least.
That's true. There's always one, yeah. Yeah, but I think I'm hoping that the theme goes back to being one word, because I think there's a problem with multiple word themes that are essentially like a very brief plot summary. Is that, you know, if the team is essentially writing the story, then you're going to get all of those ones that are exactly the same. But if it's just one word, you can't predict it so as well.
I have mixed feelings on the theme, because you're right. When there are multiple words or a phrase, that seems to really narrow it. But then single word themes, people seem to not be very creative with those either. It's super weird. I'm just browsing through the wiki page of THAC right now, and I always thought my favorite THACs were, of course, the ones I participated in, because that's the ones I had the greatest memory of. What really happened, I think, was actually a pretty darn good theme for THAC 3. But then other ones like Giving, New was apparently the theme for THAC 6, which is super weird. I think themes are really tough. When I was running THAC, the theme was the hardest thing to come up with by far. And in fact, it was so hard I just ripped off the theme from a previous contest for 1 year. One thing I will say about running THAC is you don't realize when you run a contest of any type, it's a kind of a thankless job. Because no matter how much effort you put into it, I don't think anyone who hasn't run a contest realizes how much effort goes into it. And then you always have the thing where someone's asking a question and you like, if you just read the damn post, it would not be that hard.
Especially THAC, because they expect, they want you to be there 24 hours, like literally 24 hours of the day for every question.
Yeah, and it's like everything's answered and is there. And I think, it's silly how long it took us, but I think by the time THAC came around to me, the rule set had been pretty refined. Like, it took a while, and it's been all over the place. Some years it was weird. Some rules are really dumb, like the mod element have to be present for every frame was one of the dumbest rules. And I'm glad that's gone. But now, it's funny, every year I do think that THAC is like perfected, but then when I pass it on to Nathan, not me, another Nathan, Nathan Mellons, I think. Melas? Yeah. Known as Willow Tree. He had this idea, I think some other people suggested it, where it's like, now we have this leeway of not seeing the mod element at all for 15 seconds. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's great. I love it because I had introduced this really complex way of like, if you don't include the mod element because you want to have a close-up shot, just show me another shot of it being cropped out. And it was a huge pain because I had to go through every email and look for all these cropped out shots to verify they had the mod element. And Nathan came along and just was like, oh no, we'll just give them 15 seconds of leeway. And I think that's great because honestly, nowadays, I think the mod elements are not needed. And if I had kept running THAC, I might have just eliminated them. I know they're nice because of a traditional thing, like the nice tradition. I think it would upset a lot of people if it got removed. But I don't think people realize that most people aren't going to cheat in THAC.
Yeah.
The people are there for the event. The prizes are good. They're fun. They're nice to get. But the people are there because of the event. And to put so much effort into cheating would be like almost more effort than just to make a darn film.
The one case that I always said is the only way you could possibly cheat is if you had made a film set in a classroom and you had the entire alphabet in shot the entire time.
Right. And if you did like if the film was amazingly well made and you did it that way, then there may be suspicion of you cheating. Like amazing sets, amazing animation, the film is 20 minutes long, blah, blah, blah. Then it'd be like, But otherwise, let's be honest, the people who would cheat are also the people who would not be making films that would place that high anyway. I'm sure there's maybe an occasional exception, but I've run 4 THACs and several summer contests, and the people who tried to bend the rules and who were also not that many people at all just would not qualify anyway. That's kind of like the dirty little secret of running THAC is there has been times where someone did not include the mod element, probably just because they made a mistake, but they would have never placed high enough to get a prize anyway. So it didn't matter.
Yeah, so if you were to do that, if you're going to cheat, then you're wasting your time more than anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. This type of contest is just, since it's so go, 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 it's like if you were cheating during the summer contest to get a copy of Dragon Frame, that's a different thing. But for this, you like getting a $20 Lego set at max, and people do it because they love the event.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even so, like if you have started a film before the summer contest, you can still enter it.
Yeah.
So you don't even need to cheat that one.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one of the problems that I have noticed, and this is another old man yells at cloud type of thing, is I think a lot of Brickfilmers really think that there's so much more cheating going all around than there actually is. They also, I feel like, think so many more people are around to like do them harm. It's like, oh, you're going to steal my idea. It's like, no one cares. No one cares. Yeah. No one's going to steal your idea. No one's going to steal this. It's people are. I don't know. I don't know if it is a mindset of someone who is just younger, who had to deal with crap in high school. Disclaimer, I was homeschooled, so I don't know how any of that works. But it just is a very suspicious, everyone's out to get me mentality that I think generally people grow out of. But I just know it's kind of pervasive among the community for the younger members.
That's how the rule came about, where people weren't allowed to release their films before the deadline was over, because it had gotten annoying when people would release a film before the deadline, and then another one comes out and it's like the same plot because they're made for the same team. Yeah, and it's oh you ripped off my idea in like 12 hours. You've turned this around.
Yeah, I totally forgot. Him. Yeah, I forgot that was the reason, but you're right. That's totally why. And it's just like, it's so dumb. No one rips off anyone else's ideas. And
yeah, I think it's kind of funny how quite often with THAC, there's always like two films which have parallels.
Yeah.
Just like by chance. I remember that because there was these two Brick films one year that had very similar titles. And I was commenting on one saying how much I loved it and all that kind of stuff, and then I realised that I had commented on the other Brick film.
Nice, yeah. I mean, that's just going to happen with THAC anyway, and that's why I think honestly mod elements could be removed, because the theme is enough to tie. Yeah, to prove it. There'll be occasionally, like looking back, I totally forgot the theme for Unsound was giving, and honestly I don't know why Unsound won with that, because I blatantly ignored the theme for the most, but like I was like, oh, they're giving him a treatment or something. I don't know, I had to stretch it to make it work.
He gets given money at the start, I guess.
Maybe that was my justification. It was weak. It was a weak justification for the theme, but you can just generally tell for the most part, like based upon the quality of the film, based upon the theme, it's pretty obvious it's made for THAC. And again, I just don't think people are inclined to really cheat. And I think the whole adding the 15 seconds rule about not seeing the mod element is great, because I think a lot of people are not inclined to cheat the whole way, but I know people are like, I gotta fit this stupid mod element in, and it's going to actually mess up my shot. Because more and more people like to do really extreme close-up shots where it's hard to fit something in. I think it's a really great solution to allow people to either, if they made a mistake, they could just use the shot where they made the mistake, or they could intentionally not use the mod element for a shot based upon how they wanted to frame it. I know that I probably would use it like that, where like, oh, maybe I want a shot of like, say, a night sky, and there's no way I'm going to stick the letter A up there. I'll just be like, okay, 5 seconds, there's my night sky shot, and I'm still good.
Yeah.
Yeah. One trick that I use is if you make the minifigures clothes the mod element colors, then you basically don't have to think about it again.
Yeah, and I did that for Unsound, I think. I think the mod element was green and red, and which is why he's dressed like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's been times where I've been filming during THAC and I think to myself, oh no, I'm nearly done this shot and I totally forgot the mod element. Then I realize, oh wait, it's just the guy. It's fine.
Plus, the whole not having it to be in every frame is such an improvement. Like that, I don't know how that came about, but it was one of the dumbest rules that ended up in THAC.
Yeah, I don't know how that lasted as long as it did.
I think this idea is great about having these 15 seconds, but do you think it's going to be harder to actually to take longer to qualify entries, because they're going to have to like check it is actually 15 seconds and no, not over, and that kind of thing?
Honestly, I think that only if it stands out as being dodgy will it be counted.
Yes, I believe that's how it'll be. Like when I was judging, again, I'll be totally honest here. Unless a film blatantly looked like it was breaking the rules by accident or intentionally, would I like mentally flag it. I'm sure I've let films get away with maybe not having the mod element properly once or twice. But not to generalize, but for the most part, films that broke those rules also would not have placed high enough to get prizes anyway, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, in most cases, you can just tell from the overall film that it's made in 24 hours.
Yeah. There's been one exception to this rule, and that's why I gave it a special mention, is the film Space Horse, for the last THAC I did, where it would have placed reasonably high, not top 3, probably somewhere in the top 5, but it was blatantly missing too many mod elements, and that's what stood out to me. But most of the time, when I'm watching a film, first I watch it to enjoy it, and then the second time I watch it and be like, scanning for the mod element, and it's not that hard to keep an eye out for it. I don't know how Nathan will handle it for these 15 seconds, but I feel like if he's like, it's been a long time since I haven't seen the mod element, he'll just, it's his problem now. Good luck, Nathan.
Yeah. But I do imagine, though, like, if you did find that a film had 16 seconds without thing, they might give it, like, just about either a pass, maybe. I don't know.
Well, as I was getting at,
Yeah.
that would be so close that you wouldn't notice it, so you wouldn't bother going to count the seconds.
Agreed. And again, I think it'll come down to if it's like, it's blatantly obvious, and if the film is in contention to actually get prizes where people would actually complain if this film got away with it.
That's true too, yeah.
And because another thing I have found, I'm so glad THAC is now doing just top 10 ranking. I hated ranking all of them. I mean, I didn't have to. I was like, no, this is dumb. THAC is great. I'm really glad people do it. But after about 8 films, they all start looking the same. They all start about being equal amount of quality. And I generally struggle to rank anything above 7th place. And I do put an effort to make sure I rank them like up to the top 10, but it's a bit of a crapshoot after that, which is why I absolutely refuse to rank beyond the top 10, because that's just the nature of THAC. I don't want to bum anyone out. I don't want to put down anyone who made into the top 10, because if you made into the top 10, the judges worked hard to make sure you got in there, because we would have arguments about who would get in there. But usually, especially like for the last THAC, when we watched everything with like The Exquisite Corpse by Rob Bauer, Chris Wynn, and Lucas Mass, we were like, oh yeah, this is no debate, this one wins. This one's it. And then it was like, we had a little back and forth, like Corn Season, and then Elaine 2. And then after the top 3, which was really easy, then it's like, okay, is Business Meeting better than Billy Mays? And it's like, well, here's this justification. And then it would be like, well, if you have Business Meeting here, then I want Tree Father here, because I think Tree Father is better than Whale, Whale, Whale. That's what happens. That's maybe one of the dirty little secrets, at least how I ran THAC. After the top 10, it gets a little muddled.
I think that watching a contest playlist, to me anyway, there's always one entry that stands out as like, this is going to win. I just know it.
Yeah, when I was watching it, especially for the most recent THAC, because that's the one that's in my mind, immediately, it's pretty obvious, because generally the first few films submitted are not winning material, just by the nature of usually the first few films don't have as much effort put into them. And then you'll be like, I'll make notes of like, oh, this one looks pretty good. And then there'll be one where I'm like, oh, dang, yeah, this one's a contender. Like, I remember... I'm looking at like the 4 contests I ran, and it was like, well, yeah, like when THAC 12 happened, I was like, oh, this Warshaw film, pretty darn good. Let's put that in the short list, And then they'll be like, Phantasma or Vengeance of a Different Sort, and I'd be adding stuff. Oh, Never Meant to Be. The top films generally rose to the top really quickly, and with the other judges, there was very little debate on that for the top 3. I mean, usually it'd be like the top film would usually be evident, and then we'd argue a bit over like second versus third or third versus fourth, because that's definitely the hardest one is which film are we cutting out of the prize pool? Because usually third and fourth are both quite good, and we have to like figure out which one is not getting the prizes. And then after that, it's more like, this one's good, more personal preference, like which ones we'd want to be featured in the top.
Yeah, I'd never find second and third to be so obvious, but I always find that there's just one where I've got a pretty good idea that it's going to be on top.
Yeah, and I think just it's funny how THAC does that. Is it's generally really amazingly obvious. Like, I'm trying to look back. I'm just scrolling through. I'm skipping over all the THACs I wasn't around for because I don't really have attachment to that. But like, yeah, they all. I mean, the early THACs don't make as much sense because those are kind of messy. But
yeah, I could debate some of the earlier ones, but mainly I think Weed Cops should have won.
Yeah, well, where is Weed Cops compared?
That's sick.
Winner. Yeah.
Of course, nowadays Weed Cops would be disqualified.
Oh yeah, for a lot of reasons, for every reason. Yeah, but I still think for the most part, it is a good selection.
Yeah.
Before we start the showcase, I have another question I'd like to ask actually. What would you say is the most difficult thing you've ever filmed?
Most difficult thing I've ever filmed. Wow. That's a tough one. I've got several candidates. There is this shot for the still unreleased Appetite Lost, which is a film that I infamously started, and then this minor little thing called the Bricks in Motion documentary happened and threw me off track for a while, where it's a shot where it starts as a minifigure scale car, and then it dips behind a hill, and then in the distance it becomes a mini scale car. And so I use forced perspective to make it look like the car traveled a lot further. And it's at night, and I used a bunch of LEDs to light it up and to hide the set, because if you lit the set up, like there'd be huge holes in it. And it's a really awesome shot. I'm probably going to release it as part of a animation reel at some point, like start of the year, because I still want to complete Appetite Lost, but I feel like I need to rework the ending now because it just isn't relevant. But it was definitely one of the most challenging shots because the car is actually lit up with LEDs, and it was too small for it to have a battery box in it, so it actually has a umbilical cord of wires hanging from it that I had to hide from the camera as much as possible as I animated it driving down the hill. So that one is definitely top challenges. And then almost everything I did for the Bricks in Motion documentary was a challenge and a half, because massive scale sets, working with other people, being able to work on the fly with changes where Philip would be like, oh, actually, we just tried to get it like this. I'm like, okay, I got to redesign the set. And we were filming in my kitchen at my studio, at my apartment, because it was the only spot in the apartment that had a non-carpeted floor. And on the carpet, if we were on the carpet, the table would shift ever so slightly if you stepped near it. I could get around it as one person because I knew where to step without shifting the table. It's like very minuscule, like tiny amounts, but it's really obvious when you're animating. But with 3 people, we needed to animate and not have to worry about that. So it was in the kitchen. It was 2 weeks of nonstop animating. Zach would drive up on the weekends and help animate for the complex shots. Then Philip and I would animate everything else. That was like just the most exhausting because it was like a real film shoot. Like get up, work, go to bed, and we had to tape up the whole apartment. No light could come in, and it was just like non-stop work. Some of the best work I've done. I'm really happy with how it looks, but that's probably a candidate for like the hardest shot. Like just everything I did for the Bricks in Motion documentary.
Yeah, I actually was meaning to ask about Appetite Lost and if we'd ever hear of that again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have filmed roughly half of it. And luckily, the first half, I think, is completely solid. Like, I don't have to change anything about it. The second half is it's a punchline that I don't think is relevant anymore. I'll say it was kind of a critique of like back when I don't know if you guys have it over there, but there was this TV series called Hannibal that was based upon wow, I'm just blanking on the film.
Silence of the Lambs.
Thank you. I was thinking Lambs, and I was like, what? Silence of the Lambs. And it's apparently a really good TV series, but it's extremely gory and I was kind of critiquing the whole how much violence there was on television thing, and I don't think the punchline is as relevant anymore. So I want to salvage Appetite Lost, but I might actually really drastically rework it. Like, I have the footage that I have, and I really like it, but it may even result in like a title change and a completely different second act. I don't know yet. It's like I'm sitting on it. I have other interests, like I'm really enthusiastic about The Cleaners right now, so Appetite Lost is just kind of like in this weird limbo, and it was definitely something I was wanting to complete, but the documentary absolutely zapped all of my energy. Like, no one realized how much the documentary was going to take out of everyone's lives. It went from like, oh, let's do this thing for a year and a half to 3 years of this constant just stuff happening, and I don't regret it because it led to a ton of opportunities. The documentary just alone led to me meeting Zach in person, which means we collaborated in person, which led to The Cleaners. So, and now we're working together, and there's a ton of awesome stuff, and we're excited for the future with that. I met Philip in person. He's been a great contact. He's a good friend. He's given me a lot of advice about filmmaking. The documentary itself got Philip into a great job. It got me partially into my new job. And, there's a ton of things. So the documentary all around was great, but it still was like 3 years of my life, essentially, and killed Appetite Lost, at least for the foreseeable future.
I think you should probably stick with the name, even if it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic now. Like, I want to... Yeah, it's like, I don't want to kill... Like, yeah, it's not like I'm going to, but I'm just like thinking about, like, what can I do with this footage? And luckily, since I actually animated it, there were no mouth shapes. I was going to do digital mouths as an experiment. So I have the opportunity, even if I want to redub dialogue. It's just like, I'm sitting here going, what can I do with this? How can I salvage this? But it could be something pretty drastic. It could be a pretty drastic reworking of the material I have. We'll see, though.
And I suppose another question is, do you think that there's any future for Alex and Derek?
I'd love to have a future with them. There hasn't been a story that has come up that I wanted to tell with them yet. Alex and Derek are tricky because they've been hard to keep up with me. And what I mean by that is Alex and Derek were always two parts of me. They both have qualities that are like me, but also qualities that are not like me. And they were meant... It was interesting because compared to, say, Zach's Ben and Andy, where they definitely were younger and grew up with Zach and now have roughly matched their age, Alex and Derek were originally older than me. Like, they were already adults in their own apartment. But now I've grown up faster than they have, and the stories I'd want to tell with them, I need another time jump. It's stupid. Like, I time jump them with 5 years later, but if I wanted to do anything with them, I feel like I'd have to time jump them another 5 years, and do I want to do that? So I'm never going to say no to an Alex and Derek film, but I haven't come up with something that interests me, because one thing with Alex and Derek is I don't want Derek just to be the dumbass, and I don't want Alex just to be the straight man, just responding to the whatever Derek does. But I just don't want to make a two guys film anymore. I want them to be more interesting than that. And as they've progressed, they've become more and more grounded. Like, I know in Material Possessions, he blows up his apartment with a bazooka. But as they've continued, they've become more and more grounded, unlike, say, Benny and Lee, which I love. Benny and Lee is bonkers, and they've never lost that. But I don't think I can do crazy stuff with Alex and Derek anymore.
Yeah.
There was one time where I entertained the classic idea of a body swap episode or something, goofy stuff like that. But I think that doesn't fit them for now.
Yeah, they definitely did become a lot more real compared to the other series. But yeah, on the note of having to do another time jump, hate to mention it, but the 5-year anniversary of 5 years later is coming up soon.
Oh, I'm well aware of that. Yeah,
you'd have to do Alex and Derek another 5 years later.
Yeah, I think the problem is as now officially an adult. I can't say I'm not an. I mean, I'm 30 now. I'm adult. I have adult duties, adult job. I have a house. I do other things. I have other interests. I only expect to release one brick film a year, and maybe more. I mean, I'm not going to count THAC for my 2019 brick film. That's going to be like its own little thing. But I expect Zach and I hopefully to release Cleaners Part 2 in 2019. And that is probably it for the year, because we have other stuff we got to do, other things we're interested in making, and also other things happening in life. So if I think of an Alex and Derek story that I want to make, I'm not going to say no to it. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm really more interested in collaboration. And I think Alex and Derek are very personal. And also, I don't want to just say, okay, Zach, you're going to animate Alex and Derek for me now, or whoever I'm collaborating with. So if I'm making a personal singular film that's just for me, I need to have a darn good reason, because otherwise that's time taken away from more Cleaners films or what else I'm working on. And honestly, as I said, right now, I'm just so into the Cleaners. I really love the characters. Zach and I are really happy with who we made. Like, when we were coming up with part 2 for the story, we would have long debates about, well, this doesn't feel like Ernie. And it's funny because Ernie's not really... we don't have much to go off of him, but we already had a feeling of what he was. And we were so enthusiastic about that. So the other potential films have fallen by the wayside, at least for now.
And actually, when it comes to the actual filming, the animating and setting up the shots and everything, what do you think is the biggest difference between shooting a film by yourself and shooting it in person with another person?
By yourself, obviously, you're doing everything. And that can get overwhelming. If you have a good collaborator and you work well with them and you each know your strengths and weaknesses, that can be huge. Like, you need to know where you're not good. Like, when we were making Rogue Unit, which is not a brick film, but does use big toy figures, we had this talk, and that was a really good collaboration because that helped. Basically, we figured out all the hard stuff before we got to the Cleaners about how to collaborate together. We were like, look, let's get this out in the open. Zach, we know that Zach is the better animator. That's just, why even ignore that? Zach is the better animator. I'm really good at set design. And Zach is really good at sound design. I'm also good at project management. I'm good at being able to say, this shot is good. Don't work anymore on this shot. Know when to cut it off. Because sometimes Zach wants to put his absolute best foot forward, which is great, which is how we got the great opening shot for the Cleaners that also took him 9 hours to animate. But there's also times when I need to say, no, this is all we need for this shot. We don't need to go crazy with this one. And so with collaborating, if you know your strengths and weaknesses and you know your place, which that sounds wrong, but if you know what your duties are, it really allows everyone to do their best because they are doing their best at what they're best at, where with doing it by yourself, it's like, I got to do sound design now. I got to do this, I really don't want to animate these 7 minifigures walking down the sidewalk. Well, now I can be like, hey, Zach, have fun. You're going to animate 7 minifigures walking down the sidewalk. But then I also have to build, so there's a trade-off back and forth. And I think that can be really nice.
Yeah. I think that's why I imagine that, like, when you do, a couple of collaborations, with like, people like Zach, and you kind of get used to that whole thing of, he's doing the stuff that I'm not as good at. it must feel kind of strange going back to just yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And what's weird is, especially now that I only animate once a year, essentially, the last time I animated was for the cleaners. So I'm like, do I remember how to do anything? And you do. You pick it back up very quickly. But it's definitely been, I imagine there'll be times where I'm like, I just want to give this to Zach to deal with. And it's definitely a different thing when you're working by yourself. And it's nice, but I do think I'm kind of spoiled now after collaborating in person with Zach and with Philip. It was interesting being working with Philip because for the documentary, since he was definitely in the director role, which I'm fine with, he would say, let's do this, and I would give suggestions, but ultimately what he said was what happened, which was good because we understood that relationship. And when you're doing everything by yourself, sometimes the fact that you're in charge of everything can be overwhelming. And they're like, oh, I got to do all of this. How am I gonna tackle all of this when you're all by yourself?
But something you mentioned there about doing something once a year and then thinking that you don't know how to do it, it just reminds me of THAC. Because I think every time THAC starts, I have a brief moment where I'm like, oh my god, how am I going to make a film in one day? It's actually not possible. It's like 6 hours in, I have 3 seconds.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about.
How has anyone ever done this?
Yeah, because I haven't done it in 5 years. You know, I did Meek and the Bold, and then I took over THAC for 4. So now this is going to be even more scary. So we'll see. Maybe I'll just do a walk cycle and be like, ta-da!
I have the kind of the distinction of every time that I have actually made THAC, I've made a film that I'm not happy with, and the one time that I've made a film that I'm happy with, I didn't make it on time.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I've got like this whole thing of like, I want to do 2 things which I haven't done before.
Yeah, I think it's all got to be about like just setting your expectations at a reasonable height, allowing yourself to not make the best film, just make a film. You know.
Yeah.
And also, I gotta say, just whatever it is, finish it and enter it. Because when I was making Warshaw, I thought it was the worst film I'd ever made. And the whole time, I thought I should give up because I just thought it was coming out just so horribly. But I eventually finished it and submitted it and went to bed. And then, eventually got up and watched it and I thought, oh hey, this actually came out alright, I guess. And now I think it's the best film I've ever done for THAC. But when I was making it, I honestly thought I shouldn't release it because it's so bad.
Yeah, and it's funny because I also think Warshaw not is one of your best THAC films, it's one of your best films. Because partially I think it's so like a bit different. You know, I really like your Benny and Lee stuff, but it's not Benny and Lee. You know, it's a very it's a different genre entirely of film, which is refreshing. And I think that's can be really fun is to see people make different types of films than what they usually make. It's like how Solar Luna is my favorite Rio Force film because honestly, it's the least like his other films, and I like seeing the different things people can put together.
Yeah, I think it's really good if you can if you have your standard, you have your comfort zone, you kind of just think, let's do something completely different, something I've never done before.
Yeah.
And I think you can end up making your best work doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. I always, now, since I'm especially limited in what I can make, every project I make, I want to do something different. It could be stylistically different, or a new way of making something. Like the cleaners, I used split field diopters for the first time, which is how you got some of the really weird shots where one half of the frame was in focus and one half of the frame is focused at a different focal length. So with each project now, since they're so limited, I want to do something different. I don't know what it will be for THAC this time. I mean, I already did a film without any minifigures, Birdie, but still, there's each time I want to do something different and push that envelope a little.
So, should we head over to the showcase?
Yes, let's do that.
Yes. Oh, we should probably establish that we have a theme for this showcase.
Oh, yeah.
Officially this time.
Yeah, we have a sort of THAC theme. I was thinking because, THAC is sort of nearly here, we would sort of do a look back at previous years and look at the films that like the non-winning entries. So
more so films that have maybe aren't recognised at this stage.
Yeah, sort of the ones that sort of got forgotten, basically. And my pick is Veetman, I think is how you pronounce it, by JC Studios, and this actually came 15th place in THAC 4, I think it was.
Yes, THAC 4.
This is actually a very obscure one. I didn't actually know it. I'm not like as well versed in like the early, like older THAC, so Penta sort of showed me a couple of different films, sort of like as an example, and this one like kind of stood out to me as a particularly kind of funny one. And so yeah, basically it's this guy has a heart attack, and you got Veetman. He sort of thinks that he can sort of bring him back to life through plugging him into a computer and sort of like sort of fiddling around with code. So it's I could definitely see why it kind of appeals to Penta. I think it's still kind of like sense of humor there.
Yeah, when you said, "Oh, this is my choice," and I'm like, "Oh, really? This is a Penta choice. This is a film Penta would pick." I had not. I had completely forgotten about this film, or had never seen it. I mean, THAC 4 is a while ago. I rewatched it, and personally, it's not my taste of film, but there are definitely some funny bits. It is very reminiscent. I feel like it's actually kind of ahead of its time in its in the absurdity type of humor that became really popular a few years later. I mean, I know this type of humor never really died, but it reminded me of the stuff that would be put out later. I don't know. I just remember those weird THAC films that had people in showers and stuff. There was definitely a weird phase.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of similar to kind of like Sanjura, his kind of sense of humor.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think he's talking about How to Shower.
That's it. There we go. Yeah, reminds me of that.
Which might have been a Brawl film.
Right. Yeah. See, I get the Brawl and THAC films mixed up too.
Yeah, we did do another film called Bathtub Challenge, which was also kind of crazy.
But yeah, it is actually like a proto Sanjura film, isn't it?
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, this is definitely something that I'd pick, I think.
Yeah.
This one always stuck with me.
I think it's a good, even if the humor doesn't fit with you, I think it's a great example of the style of an early THAC film, where it's all about the story they're telling. Because I think, especially, I've fallen into this, later THAC films are more about the spectacle. Like, look at this cool thing I could do that I managed to pull off in 24 hours. Where this one really doesn't have, the sets are basic. They're not bad, but they're in service of the story and the script he's trying to tell. Where I think nowadays sometimes the story itself can get lost when people are trying to make the spectacle as big as impressive as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think over the years, THAC has really got pushed to the limits. If you look at the early years, you can see that people were trying to keep in mind that they didn't think it was possible to go big in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now people do think it's possible.
And I think actually I think this type of film is a good representation of maybe a better type of mindset you should be having going in. Like, very simple story. Guy has heart attack. Hacker tries to use a computer program to restart his heart, and shenanigans ensue. And then that's it. Basic one street set, two real main characters, and then some secondary characters, and credits by 1:30. Something really simple. This would help. This helped me kind of like go, oh, this is maybe the attitude I should be approaching with THAC, as opposed to trying to be very like, look at how clever I am with Meek and the Bold and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the bit that kind of really cracks me up is the part where he's sort of like given up. He just throws the body over to the door. He's like, he's alive. Just think about that. It just makes me laugh. But yeah, I think it's kind of it's sort of, I guess, in a way, the stereotypical THAC film in a way. It's very much in the spirit of THAC, and I think that is a big part of its charm, I think.
Right. I mean, you have the simple story, the maybe arguably rushed animation. It's not bad, and it's just like, this is quick, trying to get it done. And I don't know, I haven't looked like what the mod element for THAC 4 was, but I'm sure it's one of the many letters that are plastered all over the background. Like, you never have this many signs in a brick film unless it's a THAC film.
Yeah. But I mean, it could have been worse. Like, you remember when people would just have the one letter on a massive piece of paper.
I remember when they would just have the letter and they tape it to the forehead or the torso.
Yeah, the torso.
Yeah.
I mean, I did one once where I printed out like a custom-made like torso, which just said P is for Professor, and stuck it on the torso.
I mean, that's kind of funny, though. It's better than if it just said Professor,
yeah.
Which would fulfill the mod element.
Yeah. So, Penta, what was your pick?
Well, I suppose if you were going to take the typical Penta pick, I had to go even further and choose a German film that requires some knowledge of Brickfilms.com lore.
When I saw this one, I was like, oh, this is also a Penta pick. Like, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I picked a film called Stromausfall by Nichtgedreht. I don't know what the title means, but what you have to understand about this film is the original THAC host, David West, was kind of infamous for never starting the contest at the 12 GMT because either his alarm wouldn't go off, or he'd have a power outage right as he was supposed to post the team, or something would always go wrong. And this film is a joke about that, essentially. But even if you don't get it, it's still a funny film. It's really well done and actually surprisingly large scale for THAC.
Yeah.
It's a lot of sets. And as far as I know, I think they actually built this stuff in the 24 hours. I mean, there is 4 of them, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't all pre-built.
Yeah, I had also forgotten about this film, and as I was watching it, it starts off in the guy's bedroom, and it's like, oh yeah, this makes sense, a THAC film put in a bedroom, and you're like, oh, no big deal. And then the film continues, and you're just like, oh, there's a new set, there's a new set, there's a new set, and just keeps going and going. I mean, they're sets of they're basic, and again, I'm not putting them down, they're just like, very simple, but they're nicely built sets. They're not crazy detailed, but they're of the style of the late 90s Lego, I feel like, or early 2000s Lego.
I think the thing is, I think it's very much, the set design is very much of its time, but it you don't look at it and straight away just think this is a THAC film. It just looks like a film from then.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. I'm just scrolling through it real fast. There's at least 5 or 6 different significant sets.
Yeah. I think my favourite one is he's running down the steps, and you've got look at it now, you've got these lions and sculptures and stuff, and it's a really nice set. You've got a check wall and
I agree. I was looking through, it's that actually stood out to me. It's oh, that's pretty, I really like that look. And
that one was a cut above. Yeah, the set with the lions heads was noticeably well designed.
Yeah. And I think all of it's well designed. It's just, it's funny how it keeps going on, because I enjoyed the humor of him, all the stuff happening to him, but it was more like me going, oh, dang, there's another set. Oh, there's another one. Are you sure this was a THAC film? Because this is crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need the knowledge of, it explains it in the start of the film in English, so it's not that hard to understand, but, it's basically... It's it reminds me of the film The Letter, where it's a guy goes out and a bunch of bad stuff happens to him.
Yeah. But I thought it was really funny how it just keeps on building and building, and there's more people chasing as the film goes on.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you get the ending where they all show up at once.
Yeah. I think it's great. And it's funny. It was nice. I'm glad you picked both of these 2 films, because I either did not see these originally, or I had completely forgotten about them. And it was refreshing to see it, because I recognize who made this. I've seen their other films, but this one just had completely vanished from my memory, and it's a great snapshot of the time as well. Now, which THAC was this from? This was even
THAC
earlier.
3.
So this was even earlier.
Yeah. Well, it was still '07.
Right.
Two
Oh, that
THACs
was
in
the
07.
weird. Yeah, early THAC was so weird.
Yeah. There was basically no rules. People just held a THAC whenever they felt like it.
I was sort of aware there was some kind of like it's like an in-joke there. You're supposed to kind of like, it makes sense mostly just to the people that were there, but like I wasn't lost at all. I could get the joke, and I think it's for someone who doesn't really understand, like wasn't there. It's still really entertaining. I think the sheer scale is just really impressive, like you were saying, and it's like. The thing that really impresses me is that there were some sets that are built literally for one shot and like a couple of seconds, and it just the dedication for of adding that kind of detail even to a normal brick film, let alone a THAC brick film, is quite impressive, I think.
Yeah, and it was a team of 4 people, so that probably helped, but that shouldn't diminish it. It was still 24 hours, and it looks good, and I think it is a good snapshot of its time.
Yeah.
And one more thing that's interesting to note about it is that it's actually in HD, even though it's from 2007.
Yeah,
It's not the only THAC 3 film that was released as a direct download in HD.
Yeah, it looks good for it's actually, now that you told me that, now I'm realizing, oh yeah, this looks really good.
Yeah.
Considering the time.
I was just looking at it again and I was thinking, oh yeah, it is actually 720p. That's quite... Yeah.
I think YouTube kind of dragged back video quality online for a good few years.
Yeah, YouTube's done a lot, but yeah.
I think people were sort of just on the cusp of increasing video quality in direct downloads, and then YouTube happened.
Yeah.
And we're back to 240p.
Yeah.
That's very true of Night Owl's stuff, because a lot of his like original uploads were low quality, and his the raw files were HD, and they look great. Like I don't know, Nathan, if you've seen the HD version of The River, but seeing it as it's intended is really amazing.
Oh yeah, I think I have a copy of it. So yeah, it's good. I'm very paranoid about keeping file high quality versions of my work, because all my stuff up until and including 30 Years of Story, the minifigure, is compressed weirdly or is low file size. Like, there was some of my early stuff that I only kept the old Real Media files when the file name was .rmvb or something like that, and I've gone back and converted them into something more reasonable that a modern computer can play. But that's all I've got. That's literally the only copy I have of those films, of those really crappy compressed versions, and it's unfortunate. It's weird because 30 Years has weird interlacing problems, and by that point I should have known to should have kept the files properly, but I think I was rushed and not paying attention. After my hiatus, everything's good now, but I just kind of had that twinge of regret where it's if only I had known, you could have kept higher quality versions.
Yeah.
But you got to learn somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was kind of guilty of that myself, because one of the first computers I used for animating didn't have a lot of space on it, and I tried to kind of salvage as much space as I could, and that did actually mean lowering the quality of some of the video files to I'd export it in Windows Movie Maker, and I would lower it down to 460p, and I really regret doing that, because there are now videos that are much lower quality I don't have HD versions of.
I think most brick filmers up until just a few years ago, where anyone could buy a 4 terabyte external hard drive for $100, basically always had to struggle with that. Where now I don't blink in it, and I actually have I'm looking at 4 different external hard drives. One is literally just labeled One Brick Studios Workshop, and one is labeled Brickfilming. I have just whole external hard drives dedicated to various things. But back then it was I only had a few gigabytes to store stuff. So I'm tossing out all original frames. I'm tossing out the AVI renders. Yeah. And it's but at least we have something, If we're done with that one, the film that I selected is actually much more recent. It was kind of cool to see that you guys grabbed films from early THACs, because mine is from THAC 12. It's called Released, and it is by someone called Abraham Feldick, Feldick, I think. Yeah, looking at his wiki entry, also known as A&W. And it actually placed third in the contest. So back then, when it was released, it was probably one of the more known films. But I really feel like it's completely disappeared since then. And it's just gone. And I don't know why that is. It's basically a pretty short film. A man is in a work cubicle, and he's just working. And it's like really nicely dramatically lit. And then he looks at the clock, and he's in a jail now. Like there's a jail door on his cubicle. And it's a pretty simple story about him feeling basically trapped. And then in the end, something happens and he's freed. And I think it's a really well shot film, considering it's a THAC film. Like, there's really good lighting. And there are two moments of like really excellent animation. There's one part where his hands stick through the bars of the cell, and it's like one of the best shots I've seen of like minifigure arms feeling lifelike, because generally those can be pretty stiff, and the way they stick through the door and try to wiggle free is really nice. And then there's another part where the cubicle kind of disintegrates, and the camera's moving at the same time. And when I remember, this one stuck with me, because I remember when looking at it, I was like, whoa, holy crap. That's pretty cool for a THAC film again. And I don't know, it just looks good. It stood out to me, and it's one that still was kind of in the back of my mind. And then when you guys came and said, oh, go select a film, I was like, okay, I think I want this one.
Yeah, I agree that it seems to have just fallen by the wayside. One THAC, so people knew it, but then it seems to disappear. And definitely the shot when the camera is turning around and the cubicle disintegrates, that's something I'd never think to attempt that in THAC.
I'm wondering if part of the reason it's kind of unknown is the guy who made it seemed to... I mean, he made a few more films after that, but it seems like he hasn't put much out, So he's not really been seen in the community since then. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, he wouldn't be in the Discord or anything.
But I find it's very dramatically lit. It doesn't look like a THAC film. I think it looks more like what you expect from the higher quality Brawl films.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think whereas the other two are kind of like more traditional THAC films, this is really kind of something different.
I think it's like an interesting comparison, because the other two, I mean, especially the Leap Man is like, okay, this feels like a early THAC film. You can tell by all of the letters pasted up. You can tell by the quickness of the story. You can tell by the simpleness of the animation. And like, this is clearly like they made this in 24 hours. It's not that hard to believe. This one is like, nothing about it says blatantly, I'm a THAC film. I was made in 24 hours.
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah. Penta, you there?
Yeah.
Cool. And you just end the podcast right there. Like, I agree. All right, bye.
It turns out we all agree with each other on everything.
Yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the film?
I do think it is interesting to compare this with the other ones we picked, since they're so far apart, and they really represent people's different approaches to THAC.
Yeah, this is the type of film I would hope I would try to emulate for when I enter this year, because this one is something I think I could pull off, based upon like it's a single set, dramatically lit, but you could probably pull that off pretty easy with a lamp or two, and it works really well. And there's a little bit of visual effects with the clock, but I could see this easily being something that I could pull off, something like this.
Also, no dialogue probably helps for THAC.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think I like that too. That's something that I would be more inclined to go toward is no dialogue, very minimal dialogue, because then you don't have to worry about
Compared to The Meek and the Bold.
yeah, which was like all
Yeah.
just talking all the time.
I think I feel like I'd like to do something of this kind of style. I think as in like tone. I think this THAC. I'm starting to try and do this kind of ratio of like if I do a comedic brick film for one contest, the next contest I got to do a serious one. And I think it's my turn now to do something that's serious. So we'll see. I mean, it depends on the theme, but I want to do something like this style, I think.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough to pull off, I think, something that's serious that doesn't come across as cheesy. And I'm pretty critical to myself of like films that, you know, Beast was meant to be a straight serious film. It's now not. It's like the most glorious B movie of all time. But the one like serious film I feel like I pulled off pretty well was Unsound. I was happy with how that came out, and Blinders too, I guess.
And I'd say Driven. I think
Yeah,
pretty
Driven's
fun.
interesting because it's kind of serious, but it's not like it helps. It's that it's motivated by it being a music video, kind of. So even if you don't particularly care about the story, the music helps drive the story along.
Yeah.
That's true. Driven is a nice one that has like I kind of forget that I made sometimes, and then when I look back I go, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I think what I'm aiming for nowadays is kind of a mixture of both. Like The Cleaners has some humor, but it also, you know, has a guy getting shot in the face, and
Yeah.
I bounce behind those might be good, but who knows? You know, I may enter THAC and be like, you know, what's time for crazy, wild, just weird, random humor. It's my time has come.
Yeah.
Probably won't though.
We'll be doing something like Veet, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I do think THAC allows you to like flex those muscles a bit, like you were talking about with Warshaw, you know, doing something different. And the same thing when I did Unsound, because the previous two THACs, or two or three that I had participated in, were Alex and Derek films, and I wasn't feeling at that time. I was like, I want to do something different, and that's how I ended up with Unsound. I was like, what's the anti-Alex and Derek? And a man getting driven to madness by getting all this sound thrown at him. And I think THAC, since it's such a limited timeline, allows you to like maybe go, oh, this time I'm gonna make a space film or a western, and I've never made one of those, you know.
Whenever I think about like what my favourite brick film of yours is, I can often go back to Driven, and it's quite funny because I know that it's kind of one of those ones that I think gets forgotten about, but I always go back to it, and it's something about, I think it's the kind of the look and atmosphere, I think, of the film. I go back to it and I really think, yeah, this is really great. It's really cool, you know, and I think it is my favourite of yours, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't forget about it because I don't like it. It's when I think of films, I'm like, okay, what were the ones that kind of had so-called impact? And it's like, okay, Alex and Derek films, Unsound, one THAC, 30 Years was commissioned by the Lego company, kind of a big deal, you know, stuff like that. And I do really like Driven because I'm looking at my timeline of releasing films, and it's gone crazy to the point where I have to reference the wiki to remember which films I've made. I'd argue Driven is my first film that actually saw me maturing as a filmmaker, because previously, Material Possessions, Stoic, Beast, Pwned, spoilers, those are perfectly fine, but they're, of a 14, 15-year-old kid. And I'm not saying I suddenly matured at 16. That's absolutely not true. But Driven is the first film where I was trying to actually put out something serious and thought out that actually worked, versus Beast, where it absolutely did not most of the time. And then I followed Driven up immediately with Infinity Squared, which I still really enjoy, and then Flashbacks, and then Unsound. So those, and then a few other little things, and then 30 Years. And that sequence of from Driven to 30 Years was like really, really good work that I put out, and I'm very happy with. And I'm still very happy with how Driven looks. I think definitely was the first time I really put thought into set design, character design, making the choice of having the main character in the world that he lives in all be flesh tone versus the world that he escapes to with its yellow skin. I think that was the first film I really put thought into where it worked and it came out well, versus earlier things where I put thought into it, but it still was rough because I was still figuring out how to do things.
I think it's kind of like your equivalent of Zach's mirrored perspective, I think.
Definitely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mirrored perspective is, I agree, where Zach turned the corner and like, okay, pay attention to this person. This person has figured it out. That's a really good parallel. I really like that. Yeah. I think mirrored perspective is still
Driven
one
was
of his best
overshadowed
stuff.
by Infinity Squared because for a while that was like hyped up as, a super impressive brick film at the time.
Yeah, I don't even think Driven was that overshadowed. I think when it released, it was actually really well received, and it got a decent chunk of those, I guess they were BAFTA awards back then. It was nominated for like 3, and then won. So I think Driven is actually pretty well received. I think it may fall by the wayside slightly because it's the music video to music that no one cares about anymore. And Infinity Squared got that weird boost when it was featured on a bunch of media. Like, for some reason, like everyone decided for a hot second that Infinity Squared was going to be featured in like ABC and the Wall Street Journal and all in like I think one other magazine. And so it got kind of unreasonably boosted versus, Driven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, I considered the two of them to be like equal.
Yeah, and I think
super
they're
impressive, great films.
And I think they're both good for different reasons. And it's funny, Infinity Squared basically was like the proto Brawl. Like, I didn't design it to be like that, but I made it in a week. But I made it in a week when I also had a week to do it. Like I had every day. Like you compare Infinity Squared to Blinders, they were made in the same amount of time, years apart, but with completely different resources, because I could make Infinity Squared all day. I was homeschooled and I could dedicate 10 hours a day to making it if I wanted. Whereas Brawl, I had maybe 2 hours each evening after work. And I think it's just an interesting comparison to look at the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so as well. I think as well, like, I suppose if you look at comparatively, you could almost imagine like Blind as being the simpler film to make, by the, sort of the less animation and all that kind of stuff. But I think it just goes to show, like, when you improve as an animator and just a filmmaker in general, like the more like detail you put into the tiniest things, even something that seems very simple can take longer than something which was actually quite complex.
And what's interesting also, if you look at both Driven and Infinity Squared, they were made at the same time or like back to back, because I reuse several sets from Driven in Infinity Squared. It's just like, if you look at like the whole part where the city street gets destroyed is the same city street in Driven that the main character drives down. Because it was all set up. And in fact, I think the reasoning, the way I did that was I was wrapping up Driven. The idea contest was happening. And of course, with generally those take 3 months. And I had already decided I was not entering. And I wrapped up Driven. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I will enter. I only have a week. Let's do it. And the first things I filmed was that set getting destroyed. And then I moved ahead and built the apartment set for the main character. So it was like back to back and only a week. And I'm quite proud of the fact that I rushed together this joke entry in a week and it still managed to place in 4th place, out of all the other films. That was a point of pride. Just was like, oh yeah, I can still rush something together. Of course, can't do that nowadays. Got too many other things going on.
Yeah, but we've been going for quite a while now. Just is there anything you guys like to say before we wrap up?
Is this coming out before THAC?
I would like to think so, but probably not.
Okay. Well, on the off chance that it does come out before THAC, for anyone who is entering THAC, I did release a video a few years ago, top 11 tips for entering THAC 11. Even though this isn't THAC 11, I think those tips still apply. The video's okay. I'd redo it if I felt like it. But most important thing, this is cliche, but have fun. If you're not feeling well, rest. No, there's no shame in tapping out. I've tapped out. Zach has tapped out. Like, there is no problem with being like, okay, make sure to prioritize your health. Take breaks. If your eyes are feeling gritty, stop looking at a screen, look away, close your eyes, give your eyes a rest. Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. People don't do that. Try to not get distracted by the chat room because it's a tempting thing to do. And yeah, that would be my recommendations. And good luck. And if this came out after the contest, then remember those for next year, I guess.
Yeah. Or like, to the point that's listening to this afterwards, who was sick, you should have known,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Shame on you. But yeah, I might. One other thing is I might stream for a THAC if I feel like it. I've enjoyed doing the streams in the past, but they can also be a distraction. So we shall see. If not, I'll just be occasionally dropping by the Discord, and hopefully not failing.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we all make it.
Yeah, none of us are judging, right? So we can all enter.
Yeah.
I think we're all entering, all of us in the call, yeah.
Okay, so here's the goal. We all do top 3. We can fight it out on who gets that, but we all just get top 3. There we go. I'll talk with Nathan. I'll say, okay, we've decided this thing. We're getting top 3.
Yeah. And in that case, you'll join us again for the THAC special.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The same lineup. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. This has been great.
Yeah, it's tons of fun. It's great to reminisce. Yeah, I really like what you guys are doing. I haven't been able to listen to a lot of the podcast just because I'm stupid busy. And I started watching the one you did with Zach, and I was really impressed with how you were like actually making it work with like it was not just a plain audio. You actually put it together and had things go along with it. But yeah, I'm glad you're continuing the Brickfilms media type of thing.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that point of discussion, people actually coming together and talk. Because I felt for a few years we didn't actually have something like that besides the website. So
yeah, cool. It is nice. It's very different to just chatting online over text.
Yeah. Kind of makes it more like grounded too. I guess Penta, now you can take this and reference it in the history of whatever.
Yeah.
It's now solidified.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's been great.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.